For over a decade, Juventus stood as the undisputed kings of Italian football. From the glory days of winning 9 consecutive Serie A titles, dominating their rivals, and becoming a global brand, Juventus looked untouchable. They were the team every Italian club feared, and the one European giants respected. But in just a few short years, everything came crashing down. From financial scandals and shocking management decisions, to Champions League heartbreaks, player transfers that backfired, and a complete loss of identity, Juventus went from dominance to disaster. Today, the once mighty old lady of Turin is fighting not for European glory, but for survival, stability, and a chance to rebuild. How did a club with so much power, prestige, and history fall so far, so fast? This is the story of the downfall of Juventus. But before we can understand how they collapsed, we have to look back at their rise. Because Juventus were not just successful, they were dominant in a way Italian football hadn't seen in decades. After the Calciopoli scandal in 2006 that saw them relegated to Serie B, many thought Juventus would take years to recover. Instead, they came back stronger. By 2011, under Antonio Conte, Juve began a run that would change Serie A forever, 9 consecutive league titles from 2012 to 2020. During this era, they redefined what it meant to be consistent winners in Italy. They built one of the strongest defenses in football history, Buffon in goal, Chiellini, Bonucci, and Barzagli forming the legendary BBC backline. These players weren't just good, they were generational talents, combining grit, tactical intelligence, and leadership. In midfield, maestros like Andrea Pirlo, Claudio Marchisio, Arturo Vidal, and later Paul Pogba gave Juventus both creativity and steel. And up front, names like Carlos Tevez, Alvaro Morata, Paulo Dybala, and later Gonzalo Higuain ensured the goals kept flowing. This team wasn't just about Serie A dominance. They carried Italy's hopes in Europe. Juventus reached 2 Champions League finals in the space of 3 years, 2015 against Barcelona and 2017 against Real Madrid. They lost both, but their performances showed they were capable of competing with Europe's elite. For many fans, those years represented the peak of modern Juventus, a balance of tradition, tactical discipline, and global ambition. Financially, they became a powerhouse too. With the opening of the Juventus Stadium in 2011, they modernized Italian football, creating a revenue machine that boosted their global profile. By the mid-2010s, Juventus were not only Italy's biggest club, but also one of the most respected brands in world football. In short, Juventus had it all: a rock-solid defense, world-class midfielders, clinical attackers, a winning culture, and the financial muscle to match. They weren't just champions, they looked unstoppable. But here's where the story takes a turn. Because while Juve seemed to be building a dynasty, the very decisions that were supposed to push them even higher would, instead, lead to their downfall. It all started with management's obsession with quick fixes and superstar signings, instead of long-term planning. This was the first step in Juventus' downfall. After the heartbreak of Cardiff in 2017, Juve's leaders faced a choice: rebuild gradually around young talent, or take a shortcut to instant European glory. They chose the shortcut. In 2018, Juventus made one of the boldest moves in football history by signing Cristiano Ronaldo from Real Madrid for over 100 million euros. On the surface, it looked like a dream signing. Ronaldo was still at the peak of his powers, and the idea was simple: if you can't beat him, buy him. The hope was that Ronaldo would be the missing piece to finally deliver the Champions League. And in fairness, he did his part, scoring over 100 goals in just 3 seasons. But here's the problem: Juventus paid a massive price, literally and strategically. The financial burden of Ronaldo's wages and transfer fee left the club tied down. Instead of investing in a younger squad, refreshing the midfield, or planning for the future, most of the budget went into keeping one superstar happy. This completely unbalanced the team. The traditional Juve model had always been about the collective, discipline, structure, and team-first football. With Ronaldo, the system changed. Everything had to revolve around him. Younger stars like Dybala struggled to find their place. The midfield, once Juve's strongest area, was neglected. Pirlo, Marchisio, Pogba, and Vidal were gone, replaced with average signings like Rabiot, Ramsey, and Bentancur, who simply weren't at the same level. And the worst part? the gamble didn't work. With Ronaldo, Juve didn't get closer to winning the Champions League. In fact, they went backwards, crashing out in the round of 16 3 years in a row against Ajax, Lyon, and Porto. Each defeat was more embarrassing than the last. So instead of elevating Juventus, the Ronaldo era drained their finances, unbalanced their squad, and accelerated the decline. It was the first major mistake that turned a dynasty into a downfall. By the time they realized it, the damage had already been done. And this brings us to the second mistake in Juventus' downfall: poor recruitment and the collapse of their midfield. For decades, Juventus were known for building some of the strongest midfields in world football. Think back to the golden combinations: Pirlo, Pogba, Vidal, Marquisio. That quartet could dominate any team, dictating the tempo of games and balancing creativity with grit. Midfield was always the identity of Juventus. It was where they controlled matches and imposed their will on opponents. But after 2017, the club failed to replace them. Instead of carefully scouting the next generation, Juventus went for quick fixes. They relied heavily on free transfers and bargain signings, hoping to replicate their past success with smart deals. Unfortunately, most of these players underperformed. Emre Can came in from Liverpool but never settled. Aaron Ramsey, signed from Arsenal, spent more time injured than on the pitch. Adrien Rabiot, brought from PSG, showed flashes of quality but was inconsistent for years. Even big-money signings like Bentancur and Pjanic failed to evolve into world-class leaders in midfield. The result? A once-dominant midfield turned into Juve's biggest weakness. Matches that used to be controlled from the center were now lost because Juve lacked energy, creativity, and leadership. Against European teams, the gap was obvious. Juve simply couldn't compete in midfield battles anymore. And while other top clubs were investing in young talents and modernizing their squads, Juventus kept patching holes with short-term signings. They weren't building a future, they were just trying to survive the present. This midfield collapse symbolized the deeper problem. Juve had lost their identity as a team that combined strength, intelligence, and balance. Without a strong midfield, even the best defenders and strikers looked powerless. And as the midfield crumbled, so did Juventus' dominance. But things got even worse with the third mistake: managerial instability. For almost a decade, Juventus had stability on the bench. Antonio Conte rebuilt their winning mentality in the early 2010s, and Massimiliano Allegri carried it forward, guiding them to 5 Serie A titles in a row and 2 Champions League finals. Allegri understood Juventus' DNA: pragmatic, disciplined, and tactically sharp. But after the 2019 season, despite Allegri's domestic success, the board decided to part ways. Why? Because they believed his pragmatic style wasn't enough to deliver the Champions League. They wanted beautiful football, and that decision opened the door to chaos. Maurizio Sarri came in 2019 with the promise of attacking football. He won the league, but his style clashed with the players, and he was sacked after just 1 season. Then came the shocking gamble: Andrea Pirlo, a club legend, yes, but with 0 coaching experience. He was thrown straight into one of the biggest jobs in world football. The result? Juventus barely scraped a Champions League spot and looked lost tactically. By 2021, Juve panicked and brought Allegri back, hoping to restore order. But the squad had already deteriorated. Allegri's return highlighted just how far Juve had fallen, now fighting for top 4 rather than titles. And in 2024, the club turned to Thiago Motta, one of Europe's most promising young coaches. After impressing with his progressive, attacking style at Bologna, Juve hoped Motta could modernize the team, develop their new generation of talents, and bring back the fear factor that once defined the old lady of Turin. But despite the expectations, his time in Turin ultimately came to an end, leaving Juventus searching once again for stability and direction. In just a few years, Juventus went from stability and clear direction to constant change and confusion. The players didn't know what system they were playing. The board didn't know what identity they wanted. And the fans watched as the once proud old lady stumbled from one failed experiment to another. This managerial merry-go-round not only killed continuity, it sent a clear message: Juventus had no long-term vision. They were chasing quick fixes instead of building a project. And without a clear philosophy, even the best players can't succeed. Without a clear philosophy, even the best players can't succeed. And that brings us to the fourth mistake: financial scandals and mismanagement. Juventus have always been a powerful institution in Italian football, but in recent years, the club's problems off the pitch became just as damaging as the ones on it. In 2022, Juventus were rocked by the Prisma investigation, which uncovered suspicious financial practices. The club was accused of inflating transfer fees to balance their books and hiding losses to meet financial fair play requirements. Players' salary agreements during the COVID pandemic were also called into question. The result? Juventus were handed a 15-point deduction in Serie A, later reduced to 10, which completely derailed their season and left the club's reputation in tatters. This wasn't just about numbers. It exposed how badly the club was being run at the top. Instead of focusing on rebuilding the squad and creating stability, Juve's directors were playing financial games to cover up years of reckless spending, especially during the Ronaldo era. Key executives, including Chairman Andrea Agnelli and Sporting Director Fabio Paratici, eventually resigned, leaving a leadership vacuum at the club. And just like that, Juventus weren't just struggling on the pitch. They were fighting legal battles, financial instability, and the loss of credibility in the eyes of fans and rivals. The proud image of Juventus as a model of professionalism was shattered. For a club that had already been scarred by the Calciopoli scandal in 2006, this new wave of controversy felt like history repeating itself. Only this time, the damage was both sporting and financial. Instead of moving forward, Juve were dragged backwards, paying the price for years of arrogance, mismanagement, and short-term thinking. The financial scandals didn't just cost them points. They cost them their identity as a trusted giant of Italian football. The financial scandals didn't just cost them points. They cost them their identity as a trusted giant of Italian football. And this leads us to the fifth and final mistake: the collapse of Juventus Serie A dominance. For nearly a decade, Juve ruled Italy without challenge, 9 consecutive league titles from 2012 to 2020. But dominance breeds complacency. While Juventus sat on their throne, their rivals were rebuilding in silence. Inter Milan, under Antonio Conte, rose again with smart signings like Lukaku, Barella, and Hakimi, eventually breaking Juve's streak by winning the Scudetto in 2021. AC Milan rebuilt patiently, developing young stars like Theo Hernandez, Tonali, and Leao, and went on to lift the title in 2022. And then came Napoli, playing some of the best football in Europe, crowned champions in 2023 after 3 decades of waiting. While Juve's rivals grew hungrier and sharper, Juve stagnated. Their squad got older, their recruitment weaker, and their football outdated. The intimidation factor, the aura that once made teams fear Juventus, was gone. Suddenly, matches that used to be automatic wins became battles. Clubs like Atalanta and Lazio began to outplay them. And as Juve slipped further behind in Serie A, the gap in Europe grew even larger. The old lady, once the face of Italian dominance, became just another team fighting for a Champions League spot. This was the final nail in the coffin. Juventus didn't just lose their dominance. They lost their identity, their fear factor, and their place at the top of Italian football. From the heights of 9 straight titles and Champions League finals, they had fallen to scandals, instability, and mediocrity. The downfall was complete. But football is a cycle, and maybe, just maybe, Juventus are beginning to rise again. In 2024, the club made a bold decision by appointing Igor Tudor as manager. A former Juve player himself, Tudor has brought back the hunger, discipline, and energy that the team desperately lacked in recent years. And so far, the results are promising. Juventus have started the new Serie A season in superb fashion, 3 wins out of 4, showing not only defensive solidity, but also genuine quality in front of goal. For the first time in years, Juventus looks sharp, united, and dangerous. The aura that once defined the old lady of Turin might just be returning. Of course, it's still early days, but after years of chaos, financial scandals, and underachievement, there's finally a sense of hope in Turin. What makes this new chapter even more exciting is the rise of young talents. Thiago Jallo Conceição, Kenan Yildiz, and Kefren Thuram are injecting energy, creativity, and hunger into the squad. They're giving Juve exactly what they've been missing: freshness, unpredictability, and a glimpse of a brighter future. Paired with experienced leaders, these youngsters could form the backbone of a new Juventus era. With Igor Tudor at the helm, and this blend of youth and experience, Juventus might finally be on the path back to the top. But the question remains, is this just a hot start, or the beginning of a true comeback? I want to hear your thoughts. Do you believe Igor Tudor is the man to restore Juventus to greatness? Or are Juve still a long way from reclaiming their throne? If you enjoyed this breakdown of Juventus' rise, fall, and possible revival, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you don't miss more deep dives into football's biggest stories.